Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha, Lakers beat writer for The Athletic, and welcome to episode 78 of Buha's Block. On today's episode, we're going to be covering 5 ways the Lakers can stop the skid that they're on. They've lost 3 straight games, 4 of 6 overall. They're just 2-4 since swapping D'Angelo Russell out for Dorian Finney-Smith. So I will be looking into 5 ways that the Lakers can try to turn their season around, as it looks to be spiraling for like the 3rd time this year. Of course, it has to be said that the Lakers are going through a lot off the court. As I mentioned last night in my post-game reaction, I wanted to give the group some grace for the San Antonio game and it being the first game back in nearly a week. Multiple players had to evacuate. JJ Redick's house was burned down, and there's a lot of external factors going on. That said, there was basketball played and there was stuff to critique, and I'm going to go through, upon rewatching the game, have some additional notes to last night's reaction and coverage. And then we'll be going through some larger trends. So before we get started, you guys know the drill. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications so you never miss a video or a live stream, and make sure you like and comment on this video. And for those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. So fix number 1 for the Lakers is going to be stop switching as much. And this has been a season-long trend for the group, where they go through these phases where they just really struggle with their switching. And we saw it earlier in the season. They were a good offense and terrible defense. We've seen it more recently, where they've been a mediocre offense. They are 14th over the stretch of 6 games post-trade. They're 2-4 again, but 14th in offense, 28th in defense, and 24th in net rating. And for the record, I get why JJ wants to be a switching team. There are benefits to being a switching team, including keeping the ball in front of you, simplifying screening actions, and stymieing pick and rolls, and leaning into switching makes sense from a theoretical and philosophical perspective. I also think, looking at the Lakers roster, they do have several guys who are like-sized, and you could envision a scenario in which AD and Rui and LeBron and a healthy Vando and even a Christian Wood and Jackson Hayes and Cam Reddish and Max Christie, Dorian Finney-Smith, all these guys can switch across multiple positions in theory, and you can envision the Lakers being the swarming defense. But in reality, the practical application of this has not gone well. And the Lakers have had stretches where they've switched well, and often it comes against lesser offenses and lesser opponents, teams that they have a physical size advantage against. But against good teams, against teams that are quicker than them, against teams that are more athletic than them, against teams that can physically dominate them, which at this point it feels like is most good teams, the Lakers are at a disadvantage, and they just don't have the defensive personnel to run this scheme effectively. And you look at the Spurs game, San Antonio was able to run Chris Paul, Harrison Barnes pick and rolls and target Max Christie, target Austin Reeves with Harrison Barnes in the post, and attack one-on-one, get to the rim, get to the free throw line. They were able to get Anthony Davis, Jackson Hayes switched onto Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson, Stephon Castle, and get those guys downhill. And then with a smaller Laker having to wrestle and box out and just jockey for position with a Victor Wembanyama, a Bassi, even a Harrison Barnes, a Johnson, Julian Champagnie, like those guys were able to get offensive rebounds. Sometimes just not even, they were unguarded. And this also speaks to some of the passivity with the Lakers scheme in terms of like, if you have high motor athletes and guys who are flying around and scrambling and covering a lot of ground, that's one thing. You can play this style of defense, but the Lakers off-ball defense was atrocious, particularly in the second half. And I look at both Rui Hachimura and LeBron James as the two biggest culprits, where both those guys, Rui in particular, Stephon Castle had, I believe, 14 points in the third quarter, largely at the expense of Rui. And it was just simple off-ball stuff, like Rui overhelping, not being in the passing lane, not being ready to recover out to the corner. Castle gets an open three, him losing him along the baseline for a cut that then leads to a foul. I just thought Rui was pretty unfocused and undisciplined defensively with his off-ball coverages, not boxing guys out, not rotating, and just not being in the proper spots on the floor. And this has been a recent trend with him, and I will touch on Rui in a later fix. I assume you guys know what I'm going to be saying. But also LeBron. I thought LeBron, especially with his box outs, was just often standing there, not making contact, not rotating, and his low man presence and defense was non-existent for a lot of the night. And so those two compounded with the Spurs targeting Max Christie, Austin Reeves in the post, or them just having a speed and athleticism advantage against some of those guys off the dribble. I think that also applied to Cam Reddish. Had a pretty rough game overall, but I thought defensively he was beaten off the dribble at the point of attack. Gabe Vincent was too small for some of these guys, and Dalton Connect, of course, is a glaring target for opposing offenses. I thought he had a couple of decent plays defensively, but in general is a guy the Lakers are trying to hide. And then Jackson Hayes was also a guy that the Spurs targeted, got downhill against, got offensive rebounds, got to the free throw line, scored over him. So the Lakers just have so many parts of their defense that can be picked apart right now. And I just think switching in the manner that they've been switching, it invites teams to mismatch hunt. And it's one thing if the Lakers were better with their help defense, if they were more active and scrambling and boxing out and had players who could play up a bit. And I think there are guys like Dorian Finney-Smith is active in the paint in terms of his boxing out. I think Max does a good job of fronting bigger players. He's had success against Victor Wembanyama earlier in the season. Had a couple nice defensive possessions, but wasn't as effective last night. I think Austin competes in the paint in terms of boxing out and trying to be physical, but there are limitations with several of those guys. And when you are switching, you are inevitably going to have bigger players getting inside position and getting offensive rebounds, putbacks, fouls, etc. against smaller guys. And if the Lakers had higher motor personnel that played with more physicality, personnel that was stronger, more athletic, they could get away with it, but they don't. So I think the Lakers have to really strip it down and go back to the basics, go back to the style of defense that they were running earlier in the season, going back to that stretch in early December when they turned things around, when they had to break with the NBA Cup. LeBron missed some time, and then they went on a run where they had a stretch of being a borderline top 10 defense for several weeks there. And so during that time, they were more of a coverage team, either playing drop coverage, soft hedging, playing up to touch, and they made a pointed shift toward playing more coverage defensive schemes and not switching as much and being more selective with the switching. So I think it's a combination of doing more of that and not being a 1-5 red team, as they like to refer to it. I just don't think this group has the personnel, the mentality, the physicality, the athleticism to do that. And also, I think being more selective in their switching in general, because I think even if they go back to, okay, we're going to be more of a coverage team, there are going to be times when you're switching Max and Austin or Max and Rui or Rui and LeBron or whatever. But I think they have to really scheme and be more personnel based in terms of, is this a good matchup to switch? And if it isn't, and we're still going to switch, we need to have better counters, because the counter can't just be leave Austin Reeves, leave Max Christie on an island against Harrison Barnes, let him back them down until he can get either a good shot or up fake, draw a foul. Like they need to have better counters with their doubling and rotating out of that, or just their aggression in terms of rotating in general and scrambling out. And they could get more creative with it in terms of scram switching, which is basically having another player come and take that assignment and quickly having the smaller players switch off of the bigger player, being the aggressor and not so much being reactive. Because I think the Lakers have a very reactive defense. And the problem is, I don't think they have the athletes to be as reactive as they are. Because sometimes when these guys are reacting, once they're a half second or a second late to something, they don't have the physical tools, the athleticism to properly make up for it. So they're a split second late on a rotation or rotating over to close out on someone or as the low man, as a helper. And that's a dunk, it's a driving kick, it's an open three, whatever. So I think the Lakers need to really shift a lot defensively, and it feels like we're back to where they were in like late November, early December before they made the coverage shift. And I know, again, there are attractive things about switching as much. I think it makes sense from a philosophical and theoretical perspective. It makes sense with the outline of the roster and who the Lakers want to be from a defensive perspective. But at the end of the day, I don't think they have enough consistent defense, enough consistent energy and motor from this group. That could be a whole separate conversation of why don't they have that and why can't this group perform consistently and with a certain level of energy on a nightly basis. And maybe that points to the need to make some larger changes in terms of trading maybe multiple guys within the roster. And maybe it's not just one trade at the deadline. Maybe they need another 2 or 3 trades to really kind of remake the core identity of this group. But I think it starts with changing the defensive scheme, not switching as much, because when this group is disengaged and just not as sharp defensively as they need to be, they can be targeted. Teams can mismatch hunt against them, and they're also susceptible to offensive rebounds. So I think a lot of the problems stem from them trying to implement a defensive scheme that just doesn't work with this personnel. And again, I think that there's certainly an element of like process over results. And sometimes you need to go through a level of growing pains or a learning curve to properly implement something. But at the end of the day, with how I also think that there's a part of this of like certain guys aren't playing well offensively right now. And when they're not playing well offensively, it's going to have an impact on the defense to some extent. And maybe some of these guys regress in terms of their shooting, and it looks better because when they're making shots, the Lakers can set their defense. But combination of turnovers and missed shots, in addition to the switching scheme, I think has compounded and made this a bottom 3 defense since the trade. And in theory, they were supposed to be a better defensive team after trading for Dorian Finney-Smith, upgrading that wing spot, bringing in a 6'7", 6'8" wing who could defend multiple positions. And instead, the offense has actually been a little bit better, but the defense has been much worse. So something LA has to figure out. And again, I think JJ now has a sample size of he's tried this for 6 games. It has not worked. And he needs to go back to the scheme that they were running before the trade and being more of a coverage team. Fix number 2 is one that I've been vocal about for over a week now, and it is start Dorian Finney-Smith over Rui Hachimura. So if we look at the last 3 games, because the last 3 games, Lakers have been essentially blown out in 3 straight games. I know the Houston game technically was a close one, but they were demolished in that first half. The Dallas game, they get blown out beginning at the end of the second quarter. The San Antonio game, they get blown out beginning at the end of the third quarter. And so they lose 2 games by 20 plus. The Houston game, they were down by 20 plus in the first half. So they've had 3 rough games in a row, 3 losses, all against Texas teams for whatever that's worth, but all against teams that I think 2 of them clearly project as playoff teams in Houston and Dallas, though Dallas, of course, was without Luka Doncic, Kyrie Irving, and Daniel Gafford. And then another pesky San Antonio team that JJ Redick gave credit to after the game in terms of their adjustments to the way that the Lakers played them earlier in the season with the 2 games in San Antonio. So San Antonio looks like a team that should be in the play-in mix. I view them more as a borderline play-in team, but nonetheless, the Lakers struggled in all 3 games. And to me, it partly comes down to the starting lineup and the way that they've been playing recently. And I specifically look at Rui Hachimura and his struggles. And again, last night had 9 points, 3 of 6 shooting, 3 for 4 on threes, 3 rebounds, did have a couple steals, and I thought had some nice moments as a helper in terms of passing lane, but did a really poor job of tracking his man and where, again, back cuts or open corner threes on kick out passes, swing passes. And I thought did a rough job in terms of just rotating, boxing out, and his off-ball defense has really been an issue. And then there's also moments where the on-ball defense, especially in a matchup like this was not a good matchup for Rui defensively with their perimeter speed and athleticism, and he was beaten off the dribble. And even against a guy like Harrison Barnes, who he should be able to hold his own against, I thought just wasn't able to. So I think it's time for, like, the Lakers before this stretch were 5-2 with this starting lineup. And now that they've lost 3 in a row, they're down to 5-5. And over the past 3 games, they are minus 21 in the minutes with their starting 5 and plus 13 with Dorian Finney-Smith in place of Rui Hachimura alongside that starting group. And it just makes a lot more sense, in my opinion, because we know AD is going to be AD and bring the requisite level of defense that he brings. We know Max Christie is a plus point of attack defender. He has some limitations against bigger wings, and he has some limitations, of course, against the fastest, best scoring guards in the league. But most defensive guys are going to have some limitations there. But for the most part, Max has been a plus on the defensive end. He's been helpful. It did change the Lakers season after they shifted him into the starting lineup and made him the full-time shooting guard next to Austin Reeves. So I think AD, LeBron, and Austin are going to continue to start. I think Max has played well enough to continue to start. I just look at Rui as right now the weak spot in the starting lineup. He has not been rebounding the ball well. He has not been as involved offensively. He's been a bit marginalized on that end. And with the defensive limitations of LeBron, age 40, year 22, and just sometimes he can coast defensively or check out a bit. And then with some of Austin Reeves's defensive limitations in terms of teams targeting him off the dribble, but also targeting him in the post and targeting him on drives. I think the Lakers have to put the best defenders possible in the other 3 spots. And again, AD, best defender. Max Christie has been their best point of attack guy for quite a while now. And I think that other spot needs to go to DFS because he's a much better defender than Rui. He's a multi-positional defender. He plays with a certain level of physicality and awareness and engagement. He can switch on to bigger guys. I just think Dorian Finney-Smith, he's played with Luka. He's been to the conference finals. He's been on a deep playoff run, and he has experience. Like, we've seen the quick shot. He's got a quicker trigger than Rui, but also the ability to read closeouts and make decisions, keep the ball moving, and just keep the engine going offensively. I think he does that at a higher level. I think DFS is more equipped and just has more experience doing that within this type of offense. And to me right now has just thoroughly outplayed Rui on both sides of the ball since the trade. And the plus minus reflects that. I think that the numbers reflect that, particularly the 3-point shooting. And I just think Dorian is a more natural fit. And when we talk about if you have that core of AD, LeBron, and Austin, those are your 3 best players. Those are the guys who are going to be playing in the mid-30s plus on a nightly basis. What are the types of guys that complement them? It's 3-and-D guys. It's guys who can space the floor, cut, make quick decisions, attack closeouts, and defensively defend multiple positions, box out, be active, rotate, scramble, switch. And that's going to be DFS and Max Christie. Those are the 2 guys who provide the best semblance of two-way balance right now. And I think that it's overdue. Now, is it going to happen next game? I think LA with a 3-game losing streak has to seriously consider it. I do know that JJ is a fan of Rui. He's spoken highly of him. He's spoken highly of his coachability. LA is high on Rui. They view him as a longer term piece. And so with some of that, you do wonder if maybe he's entrenched for at least the time being as a starter. But I think that the Lakers are getting into some dangerous territory here, and I expect them to beat Miami on Wednesday. The Heat are shorthanded, and look, I mean that's a group you can't overlook because they through the years, even going back to like the Heatles days, like under Spo, one of the best coaches in the league, if not the best. He finds ways to game plan and overachieve with an undermanned group. So I would not rule the Heat out on Wednesday, especially with the way that the Lakers have been playing. But in theory, they should have a bounce back performance. And if they do, that is to be expected against a subpar Heat team right now. But I think it's time for Dorian to start. I think the data supports it, the film supports it, the skill set and just player archetype, player fit supports it. And I think Rui, with the bench basically having no scoring, you can make a case that moving Rui to the bench makes a lot of sense. And he could be, you could stagger him and LeBron a bit more. And I like some of the lineups of AD, Rui, Dalton, Max, and Austin. AD, Rui, you could go Gabe and Austin. But I think Gabe and Max should be staggered. I also think Cam and Gabe should be staggered. But I think there are different ways to get Rui going with the bench unit. And I think he should be moved to the bench. I think his minutes should be reduced until he starts defending better and rebounding better. And I think JJ's talked about holding guys accountable and making sure that, if you're not defending, you're going to be off the floor. And I don't feel like that is applied to Rui. I think Rui has been pretty awful defensively for the past couple weeks, and he has largely been unaffected from a role perspective. And again, it's one thing if he's scoring or shooting at a certain level, but even that has dipped over that time as well. So I think it's time for Rui to move to the bench. I think it's time for his minutes to be reduced. And in the bigger picture, which I'm about to touch on, I think it's time for the Lakers to restructure their starting lineup and some of their rotations. Fix number 3 is adjusting the rotation. And so I would include the DFS Rui swap as step 1 of this fix, but I think it goes beyond just the starting lineup. I think Cam Reddish has really struggled recently. He missed 3 layups against the Spurs, missed open threes. And I think at this point, I also thought what was pretty bad defensively and was beaten off the dribble at the point of attack. So he's primarily out there for his defense, but if he's not defending at a certain level and he's being as destructive and harmful as he was offensively, I think his minutes have to be reduced. So if I'm JJ and I'm making this adjustment, I start DFS, and I think you got to go Rui, Gabe, and I would go Christian Coloco. I know there are limitations to the two-way players in terms of games played, and the Lakers have to be cognizant of the limit there with Coloco. But Jackson Hayes has really struggled since returning from injury. Part of that's understandable, just given he missed over a month. He missed 20 of 21 games, but he has been, especially on the defensive end, a target for teams targeting him in the pick and roll with switching, getting downhill, scoring over him, drawing fouls. And I also think he's been really rough in terms of his box outs and stopping guys from getting offensive rebounds and putbacks and all that stuff. So I think it's probably time to phase him out of the rotation. And I would also phase out Cam from the rotation. And then I think I would go with Christian Coloco. And if you need a 9th guy, go with Dalton. The other thing with this is I just think that the Lakers, I think the DFS Rui swap balances out the rotation a bit, because right now the Lakers are seemingly leaning more into the offensive end with the starters, and then they're bringing in these defensive-minded guys like a Gabe, like a Cam, like a Dorian, but it's leading to some imbalanced lineups. And especially with LeBron, when he's out there next to a Gabe and a Jackson and a Cam, it's like that is just a horrible spacing lineup, and a lineup with 3 minus offensive players right now. And so part of this is the Lakers are running out of rotation players that they can trust and that they can rely on. And that's a larger roster problem. But part of it too is just the way that the rotation is currently. Some of these lineups are either too offensive minded or too defensive minded. They don't have the requisite two-way balance. And I think shifting Rui to the bench, DFS to the starting lineup, at least brings a little bit more balance. But I also think shifting Cam out, putting Christian Coloco in for Jackson, that also brings a little bit better balance in terms of the overall play. So I think that the Lakers, similar to The defensive scheme need to go back to the drawing board with some of the rotation stuff. I think some of this stuff has been problems all season. Like, I don't like Gabe and Max. I don't like Gabe and Cam. I think it's going to be interesting to see how Vando plays into this, but they just play some of these defensive guys who are minuses offensively, who have no gravity, who teams ignore. And if they're open, they're missing their open threes, or they're attacking a closeout, missing a layup, turning the ball over. And you just can't really play those types of guys. Like, maybe you can play one of them. You can't play 2 or 3 or 4 of them. I would even throw Jackson in there as an offensive liability, but he's also a defensive liability. Like, he's just been bad on both sides of the ball recently. The Koloko thing, I get there's a limit to how much he can play, but I would argue that with Jackson struggling, with Christian Wood still out, with Vando still out, this is the time to rely on Christian Koloko. And I think the recent version of Koloko has been better than the recent version of Hayes. Fix number 4 is one that we have talked about several times on Buha's block, as well as my post-game streams, but it is the offensive organization of this group. And it is something that they have progressively gone away from. They have gone away from it partly since the D'Angelo Russell trade, obviously losing a ball handler and playmaker. That was one of D'Lo's strengths for this group, and it is something that is beginning to look like a potential weakness now that he is gone, and something that they potentially have to solve on the trade market. But I think that the biggest thing for me in rewatching the game, and especially looking at the second half and where things went wrong, was the way that this group continues to go away from Anthony Davis. And AD had 7 of his 8 offensive rebounds in the second half, and that was the primary way he was getting shot attempts. Now, he did have some nice post-ups against Charles Bassey, and he was just abusing him. He was cooking him on the block, and he scored on him several times. But outside of that, the Lakers really went away from the AD on Wemby matchup, and he had scored on him a few times in the first half, taking him off the dribble or downhill in pick and rolls or quick post-ups, and they just went away from that in the second half. And this has been a trend now for a couple of years. It is a larger trend where they go away from AD. Another part of this was the turnovers. LeBron and Austin combined for 8 of the Lakers' 10 second half turnovers. LeBron had 5, Austin had 3. And I thought that was what really swung this game, was not only the turnovers, but the points off turnovers. Because if you look at it, San Antonio had 25 points on the Lakers' 19 turnovers. And there was that stretch there in the third quarter where, remember, Wemby got the big dunk, and they had a couple of easy transition baskets because of the Lakers' turnovers. And it was simple stuff of trying to thread the needle through traffic, running basic pick and rolls. You had the miscommunication with Max and LeBron, where Max was back cutting, LeBron throws it to the corner, Max isn't there, it goes out of bounds. So the turnovers certainly compounded this, but I also think the Lakers just went away from AD, and that's partly a credit to Victor Wembanyama and the fear that he strikes in opposing offenses, and the way that, despite AD being AD, like, the Lakers didn't really want to challenge that. But I think at some point, let's see Wemby block AD a couple times and strike some fear into him, and then you can adjust and go away from AD. But there's far too many times he was just a screener, he was just a decoy, and he had to really do the dirty work of battling guys on the offensive glass and either getting putbacks or getting to the free throw line, and LA just went away from him. So I would like to see more AD, honestly, even AD post-ups and ISOs. I think, especially last night, he had it going offensively, and the Lakers still went away from him. And the jumper, what was falling, he had a couple threes, he had a couple of long twos, and I don't really get the philosophy and psychology behind it. I think if AD's got it going, feed AD. And it's simple, right? But it just feels like the Lakers have departed from the strategy earlier in the season of using him as a hub and funneling things through him. And he still gets his numbers because he's that great. But a lot of this was just garbage cleanup from AD and him just being a beast inside. And again, he was 13 of 18 from the floor. I'd like to see that be 17 of 25. I think 18 field goal attempts was too few, and only 2 for 4 from the free throw line. And both of those were in the second half off of offensive rebounds. Might have been one post up that he got, but I think LA went far too away from it. Now, look, part of it was the turnovers and not having opportunities. Like 19 turnovers, that's 19 field goal attempts you did not have. So that plays a part into AD not being as involved offensively, and whether it's going back to more horns actions or more post-ups and ISOs, or more, like we haven't seen as many pin downs for AD and him curling and getting him on the move. And when they do those things, they will randomly do it once in like every 15 possessions. He often gets to the rim, scores, gets to the free throw line, and I'd like to see more of that stuff. Get AD more on the move. Or there was several times, I think it was late in the first half and partly in beginning of the fourth, where they just go simple LeBron AD pick and roll, and they get downhill, and either LeBron gets a basket or AD as the roller gets something. So LA, I think offensive organization has been an issue for this group, and when they freelance, they struggle, but also when they freelance, they go away from AD. And I think that they need to again, back to the basics is kind of the theme of this episode, of just reestablishing AD as the offensive hub and as the dominant force that he is. And especially, like, there are some nights where he's passive or the shot's not falling. And then I think you need to make adjustments and be more flexible with your offensive game plan. But on a night like tonight, even with Wemby there, go spam AD actions, get him more involved, get him going, and just keep that going in the second half. And I just think they did a really poor job of keeping him involved. And the fifth and final fix for the Lakers is make a trade. And I know this is the one that fans want to see and want to see sooner than later. And I'm recording this Tuesday, January 14th in the afternoon. So we are 23 days away from the trade deadline. Jared Vanderbilt is still several days away from returning on the early side. JJ Redick said he would not be returning this week. So we're running out of time to see what Vando looks like with this group. There's been no update on Christian Wood. And we're coming up on a critical period here where the Lakers have to decide, are they going to go all in on the LeBron AD partnership? Is it worth it to go all in on the LeBron AD partnership? And this recent stretch has not been encouraging. It has not been a very convincing stretch in terms of investing in this group with first round draft capital or potentially giving up younger assets that the team values, swaps and second round picks, et cetera. So this is a critical juncture for the Lakers. They need to turn their season around quickly and start winning some of these games and climbing back up the Western Conference standings. But some of the stuff, again, defensive scheme, starting lineup, rotation, offensive organization, that's partly within the control of the coaching staff and certain things that they could do. But at the end of the day, I think when looking at this roster, there are far too many one-way players. There are far too many players who should not be in the rotation on a serious team with championship aspirations. I think the Lakers are really struggling to find even like 2 productive bench players on a nightly basis. Can Jared Vanderbilt help that? Yes. But I also think it comes down to them making a move, if not a couple of moves, in addition to the move they already made, and trying to rectify this roster and trying to improve this roster, make them quicker, more athletic, younger, and better on both sides of the ball. And that's a difficult thing to do, especially with limited draft capital, to really improve the group. But as the Lakers are evaluating this group, I think some of this has to fall on the roster itself. And we could debate the starters and the rotation and the scheme on both sides of the ball. But at the end of the day, I think it's partly coming down to JJ not having many options in terms of quality two-way players around LeBron, AD, and Austin. So I think the supporting cast can certainly be improved upon. I think it should be improved upon over the next 3 weeks, but we will see what ultimately comes of this. In terms of fixes, it might just be another trade or two really being the thing that ultimately gets this group going back in the right direction. And maybe they continue to spiral and the front office decides not to invest and not to make another trade or to make a smaller move. Like, I don't think any trade with second round picks, there's maybe a couple of exceptions, but most of these second round pick type trades are going to maybe improve the group, but not really dramatically change it. I think they're probably going to have to invest real first round capital to make a sizable acquisition that makes a big difference with this group. And I don't know where they're at with that right now. So that's another fix. It's one that's maybe not as immediate. I think it's one that's going to be closer to the trade deadline if it ends up happening. But in terms of a longer term fix, I think the flaws of the roster in terms of the perimeter defense, in terms of the perimeter two-way play, and in terms of the playmaking, but also just the general motor, effort, energy, these are things that need to be improved upon. And then I will give one bonus fix. I say this half in jest, but stop wearing the city jerseys. The Lakers are 1-7 in the city jerseys. And it's not just that they're 1-7. If you look at, I'm pulling up the schedule here. So first warning sign with this was they wore the jerseys against the Magic, which was a turning point in their season. They blow that game in the final seconds with the missed free throws. And that was when they'd started 10-4. Since then, they are just 10-12 since the Orlando game. So look, it's the data is the data. They're 1-7. But looking at Minnesota, they lose by 29. Wearing the jerseys at Atlanta, they lose in that overtime game. Then the Detroit game at home right before Christmas that they lose. They do wear them and beat Portland at home on January 2nd, but then they lose in Houston and in Dallas wearing the jerseys, and then they lose against San Antonio wearing the jerseys. So they were 1-4 before this most recent stretch. Now they just lost 3 straight, all wearing those jerseys. So they're going to still wear them, I believe, something like 8-10 more times this season. And based on the way it's gone, it's kind of been bad luck. So again, I kind of say it in jest, but I also look at some of their worst losses of the season have come while wearing those jerseys. And I know it's city edition, so maybe they're trying to wear them for bigger games. So that points to a larger trend of the Lakers losing against good teams, losing big games. But I think if there's a way to change the schedule and not wear those city edition jerseys, I think that would be wise of them. But that will do it for this episode. Thank you all so much for watching and listening. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. For those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I'll be back Wednesday night after the Lakers Heat game. I will talk to you then.